You should find other black lesbians, other lesbians of color, and make a place where you can feel safe. Right? Even if there are 2 of you, 3 of you, 6 of you, make it. Do it. With a great deal of urgency, I'm telling you, that is absolutely necessary. To begin with, without it, you get really weird after a while. Right?
Welcome to Archival. I am your host, Juanita Tolliver, and today I threw out my original script, and we can blame it on Bridgerton, at least a little bit. Originally, I was preparing a series of shows probing underground abortion networks then and now, and I still might produce those shows. But while I was taking a break from that research, I watched season 4 of Bridgerton and was struck by the theme of decades-long friendships and how they are some of the most invaluable, enduring, supportive relationships. Listen to how Adjoa Ado and Golda Roosevelt, aka Lady Danbury and Queen Charlotte, describe their dynamic on the show.
The show absolutely celebrates the place of those long-term friendships. We all know that they are gold, and if you get them in your life, they will just see you through,
sustain you
everything.
through your whole life. Yeah.
I feel most joyful, most relaxed when I'm hanging out with other women whom I love, respect, and adore. Women who pour into me when they have no idea that I need it. Women who spend hours laughing and crying and talking with me, and who understand me even when I don't have the words. In my book, A More Perfect Party, The Night Shirley Chisholm and Diane Carroll Reshaped Politics, I explored the connections and friendships between women in politics and pop culture. And in chapter 8, I described it like this. Sisterhood is both a balm and a source of power. It is the protective covering that aids in one's healing, providing even the slightest respite amid trauma. It's the reassurance that someone will be there to support you when you take a risk. It's also the verbal backup in a room full of men who are attempting to interrupt you. And it's the visible loyalty and partnership that can drive political action. Outside of the realm of politics and in daily life, sisterhood and friendship among women delivers a degree of support that I never take for granted. I felt it on my birthday a few years ago when I told my friends that I was writing a book. Actually, let's be real, I whispered it. I could barely say the statement because I felt so fragile and vulnerable. And in my moment of vulnerability, my friends cheered for me. They celebrated me for even committing to the act. And then they stood with me as I wrote the book. Some of them read first drafts that were rough. And one of them was even a creative coach. They were with me on the journey. And remembering all of this, I was motivated to explore friendships between women in history. I wanted to review the archives that captured their dynamics, how they supported each other, amplified each other, and comforted each other. These relationships are important because they are the essence of community and safety. And exploring how women have made each other feel safe across time feels like a balm. The next few episodes will feature the Sisterhood archives. And today, we'll start with Audre Lorde and Pat Parker's friendship through the lens of the letters they wrote to each other from 1974 to 1989 that are featured in the book Sister Love. This is Archival. I can't remember specifically how Sister Love came into my life, but I'm certain that a Black woman told me about it. It could have been my older sister, Diana, who was the first writer in my family and a bookseller and poet in Memphis, Tennessee. It could have been one of my intelligent friends like Tamisha or Candace, who sends me books that touch their soul. But these letters are a swirl of vulnerable moments, goofy delights, and nudges of tough love that only a close friend could deliver with next to no stinging sentiment in their delivery or the reception. The letters are housed in the archives at Spelman College and the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe's Institute for Advanced Studies. They were edited by Julie Enzer. The dynamic of Pat Parker and Audre Lorde's relationship is effectively summed up in the first letter featured in Sister Love. Pat has written a poem that struck Audre, and Audre has outlined a promotional strategy for Pat. It reads in part, "You managed to not give me a copy of your new long poem, which was pretty slick of you, but not very nice, since I asked you at least twice, and you have not yet written to Galen Williams, which is a mistake. Get it together, lady." Of course, it's not really important on the cosmic scale of things. We both know it. But like every other kind of grease, it helps to keep the kinks at least manageable. And I know you know what I mean. The letter is dated October 12th, 1974. And Audre is giving advice to Pat for securing poetry readings at local bookstores, and she included a list of favorable booksellers to reach out to with the letter. Audre even encouraged Pat to use her name in her outreach. By 1974, Audre had a sizable following that stemmed from her work as a professor, a writer in residence, and her impactful poetry collections, including The First Cities, Cables to Rage, and From a Land Where Other People Live. She was an established National Book Award nominee, and she spent a considerable amount of time amplifying writers through Kitchen Table, Women of Color Press. Thus, she was even able to offer such sage advice to Pat. Audre also had access to contacts like Galen Williams, the director of the Poetry Center at the 92nd Y at the time, who was willing to help Audre and, based on this letter, help Pat by way of proxy. For Pat, the early 1970s represented life transitions as she moved to Oakland, California, published her first poetry collections, Child of Myself and Pit Stop, and began to solidify her career as a poet and activist. At the time, she was an out lesbian, a mother, a divorcee, and a survivor of domestic violence. Interestingly, Pat wrote in an April 1975 letter that her first ex-husband, Ed Bullins, Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party and playwright, didn't know that she was a lesbian until 1974. Pat's work was evocative and painted vivid pictures, and the long poem that Audre mentioned in the October 1974 letter could have been Woman Slaughter, a heartbreaking poem about Pat's older sister Shirley and her murderer, her husband. Take a listen to an excerpt of Woman Slaughter.
I used to be fearful of phone calls in the night, never in the day. Death, like the vampire, fears the sun, never in the day. Hello, Patty? Hey, big sister, what's happening? How's the kids? Patty, Jonesy shot Shirley. She didn't make it. Hello, hello, Death? Don't you know it's daytime? The sun is much too bright today. Hello, hello, Death? You made a mistake, came here too soon again. 5 months, Death. My sisters and I just met in celebration of you. We came, the 4 strong daughters of Buster Cooks, and buried him. We came, the 4 strong daughters of Buster Cooks, and took care of his widow. We came, the 4 strong daughters of Buster Cooks, and shook hands with his friends. We came, the 4 strong daughters of Buster Cooks, and picked the right flowers. We came, the 4 strong daughters of Buster Cooks, walked tall and celebrated you.
Now, if this is the poem that Audre was writing about, then I understand why she asked for it 3 times, even in its draft form. Pat's pain was palpable and relatable, effectively trademark Pat Parker. And I like to think that Audre's promotion of Pat's writing and her advice in reaching an expanded audience was a natural part of their relationship that was rooted in a mutual respect and admiration. But in reading this first letter, I'm bothered by the fact that I still had no idea how Pat and Audre met. More on that in just a second. It isn't until the editor's note at the end of the collection of archival letters that Julie Enzer wrote, quote, "Parker and Lorde met first in 1969 when Lorde was on a book tour on the West Coast. Wendy Caden, a graphic artist and member of the Women's Press Collective, introduced the 2 women. Lorde was 35 years old, and Parker was 25 years old. And this is why I take every introduction from a friend seriously. It's also why I read every author's note and editor's note, because there are nuggets there. This context makes the dynamic between Audre and Pat even more engaging and fun on a professional level and a personal level too. Audre Lorde effectively represented possibility to Pat Parker. And Pat Parker probably appeared to be well ahead of the curve and talented beyond her years to Audre Lorde. That vulnerability and personal possibility was featured in a letter from Pat dated July 25th, 1975. Pat was traveling on a tour and used the letter to describe her experiences traveling with her lover, learning to be less casual and expressing musings to reporters that she didn't actually want printed, and sharing her desire and fear about going back to school. Pat wrote, quote, "The idea of going back to school scares me. I haven't been in school for about 10 years. I worry about acquiring good study habits. I worry even more about listening to 17 and 18-year-olds telling me about the world." Pat also wrote about coming out to her mother during that trip in a stop in Houston, Texas. She wrote, quote, "It took me 3 days to get up the nerve. And when I tell her, all she says is, 'Well, as long as you're happy, it's all right with me.'" How anticlimactic. Here I've been building up this moment for 8 years, and that's it. Not even one tear or yell or look of shock. The letter was full of those play-by-play details and concluded with Pat asking about Audre's tomatoes and sharing that she picks the blueberries in her backyard and made her first pie. Honestly, it read like any hour-long meandering phone call between close friends. The ease, the drama, the quick subject changes that made sense, at least those changes made sense to them. Audre was a safe person for Pat to share her dreams and her fears. And ever the encouraging professor, Audre filled her response letter with encouragement, writing, quote, "I think it's marvelous about you in college, and you'll love it, I think, and you'll get past the garbage and Mickey Mouse. First, don't let anyone put you on. Learn what you want and don't be afraid." Observing their exchanges in these letters made me appreciate mentorship within a friendship on a more human level. They opened and closed their letters with love. It wasn't one-sided, but a shared transfer of support and appreciation. I mean, there were some imbalances along the way. One passage that Audre Lorde wrote to Pat in December 1985 made me sit straight up. Audre wrote, quote, "When I did not receive an answer to my letter last spring, I took a long and painful look at the 15 years we have known each other and decided I had to accept the fact that we would never have the openness of friendship I always thought could be possible between the two strong Black women we are, with all our differences and samenesses. There are conversations we need to have, Pat, each for her own clarity, and neither one of us has forever." This line jolted me straight up because this was a confrontation rooted in a desire for reciprocity in a friendship. And Audre wanted more from Pat, and she was asking for it directly. I was slightly confused about what Audre meant by openness of friendship, though, because these babes had been open. I mean, there was the time Pat wrote about being unfaithful in her relationship and the bruises it left on her and her partner. So maybe we have different definitions of openness. Maybe I need more context here. Considering that Audre and Pat were scheduled for a reading together in San Francisco, California in February 1986, less than 2 months after Audre's call out in her letter, there was no delaying or avoiding this important conversation. And things must have gone well because Pat's next letter was written just after Audre had left San Francisco, and the tone was buoyant. All in all, this is an example of healthy conflict in a friendship that both people value to the point where they want resolution. Audre Lorde and Pat Parker experienced growth, art, love, and loss throughout their friendship. Unfortunately, they also shared experiences with breast cancer too. First, Audre was diagnosed in 1978, and she worked through her cancer journey by writing the cancer journals. Then Pat was diagnosed in 1987. The fact that they were both diagnosed with breast cancer in their early 40s at the time of their separate diagnoses is not lost on me. I think it presents another parallel experience where Pat saw the possibility of a future and a life after cancer, as Audre was surviving her diagnosis. Ever the sister love and mentor, Audre offered Pat reassurance about her choices related to her cancer treatment, including her choice to have chemotherapy. Audre wrote in all caps, "Any decision we make about our own bodies after considering facts is the right decision." She had, in fact, been there before. Audre listed questions that Pat should ask her doctors and recommended medications to counteract the effects of chemotherapy. She also modeled how cancer didn't stop her life or her work, and Pat took it to heart. In between their treatments, both women traveled the world. They loved their partners and their children, and they wrote. Audre reminded Pat that even in writing their letters, they were living. On February 6, 1988, Audre wrote, quote, "The fact we're writing these letters to each other is a triumph, Pat. I feel it, and I want you to feel it too. You've been doing what you came to do, sweetheart, and I think you changed the world." Pat Parker died from breast cancer in 1989 at the age of 45. Audre Lorde died from breast cancer in 1992 at the age of 58. Before we close out this episode, I want to share some of the research that nearly got left on the cutting room floor. It's time for my favorite segment, One Last Nugget. While researching the friendship between Pat Parker and Audre Lorde, I came across a few reflections from people who knew Pat Parker and shared them during interviews with Deborah Wilson at the Sister Comrade event on November 3rd, 2007 in Oakland, California. These clips paint a picture of how Pat Parker and Audre Lorde moved within the queer community and their ability to inspire and connect with others on multiple levels. This first clip is of an attendee named Kathy Cade sharing her first memory of Pat Parker.
My first memory of Pat Parker is about 1972 when she was part of the poets who would read their poetry right before we had women's dances. We'd hear the poetry and then we'd have the dances and we'd all take our shirts off. And Pat really stood out as a wonderful poet and a strong woman. And women would be there who probably never liked poetry before in their life, but this poetry we all loved.
Here's a clip featuring Ollie, a former lesbian bar owner who was a longtime friend of Pat Parker.
Parker was a wonderful lesbian. She was a dyke. She loved discussing. No matter what the subject, she would find a discussion. And she would change positions and options just to keep going. She also introduced me to Audre Lorde, who told me that sex gets better every decade, and that's kept me alive for many times, a lot of faith in the future.
Y'all, the belly laugh I let out when I listened to these clips was wild. I love the honesty. I love the connection that they had and the comfort captured in these recollections. And it was the same energy captured in the letters between Pat and Audre. They were themselves, the essence of authenticity and awareness. And I'm so grateful to have seen these clips, and special thanks to Lisbeth Tellefson for preserving and posting them online. Thank you for watching Archival. Reviewing these intimate, vulnerable musings between two friends evoked a deep sadness in me because I paused to wonder, what will we be leaving behind? In our digital-first communication norms today, there won't be any archives of handwritten and printed letters. I mean, maybe archivists will print screenshots of our text messages and our DMs, but I don't think I like that idea. I don't think I can accept that. As the granddaughter of Aurelia Lester, a woman who would send me a handwritten cursive note just because, I know I can't accept that. So I'm gonna pull out my stationery and start writing letters to my friends and family. I want my loved ones to have something tangible from me that carries my touch and my words. And I hope this episode inspires you to send a letter to your sister friends every now and then. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment and a rating wherever you get your podcasts. Archival is a production of J. Tolliver Media, LLC.